Magic is a force that is ever present, an energy, a weave, that holds the potential for any spell at any time. When you consider your surroundings, consider that you're walking amongst a million wish spells left uncast. But the areas themselves for the most part aren't the source of inspiration for spells. If we wanted to learn the spell Wish, it takes a lot of study and perhaps the dissection of a djinn or a freet or two in order to learn how to turn the physical and innate ability to cast spells into gestures and words and material metaphor. The study can take years, or weeks if you're oppressed by constant threat of death. With a lot of psychic abilities, you'd think that we could easily transfer spell knowledge from one mind to another, fully laid out every secret and ability able to be shared and disseminated. But we can't, because that's not how our particular type of magic works on Toril. There might be other forms of magic. Elminster certainly assures us that Vancian magic and supernatural ability are not the only forms of magic. They're just the easiest and most universally accepted forms to learn. In previous years we had psionics, which were powers manifested from the mind. The texts suggest that there was some ambiguity around whether psionics were an aspect of Vancian magic just with spell components created by brain power, or if it was a completely different form of casting. Some historical documents state that dispel magic and counterspell could disrupt psionics, and others state they could not. Some psionic beings can create effects that don't mimic spells at all, such as the poster child of psionics, the Illithid, and their Mind Blast. Regardless, even scions and psychic warriors couldn't grant their awakened knowledge to another, and while a god may be able to do so with the occasional spell knowledge, because they're gods and therefore capable of nearly anything, there was no shortcut to amassing ability, and that's probably a good thing too. Because what if the road to power was paved with the blood of the slightly less powerful? What if you could be a supreme psychic being just by ripping the knowledge from another? Thankfully, we can't. But what if we could? Far, far away from the familiar paths. Long, long way away from realm space, connected only by the theme of magic and not even the magic we know, lies the world of Sui Genesis. A world populated only by humanity, and even then only the remnants of a fallen population, beset by demons and forgotten gods and the dangers of a decaying past. Living in fear each day, their once benevolent protectors against the supernatural threat instead turned to cruel and dark activities as they fight for ultimate power amongst other entities both within and without. These individuals are the Thaumaturges, and they are the subject of this episode of Plane Shift. Like Toril, Sui Genesis has a mystical energy that envelops the world. This is called Thaumaturgy, and can be evoked by individuals whose minds are keyed to that energy. To that point, it is not an ability that can be learned, nor is it something given by a higher entity. It appears to be something that you're either born with or not, which means that it's closer to the ability of a sorcerer than a wizard or cleric or warlock. They are not the source of Thaumaturgy, but rather can latch onto the ever-present energy and create effects. But doing so requires mental power. We gotta say right up front that there's mental focus and thaumaturgic power. Mental focus to shape the thaumaturgy into the effect. Focus and T-power. Right? Right. It's not the background concentration of a spell like in 5th Age of Tyrillian magic. I think I could liken it to the mental equivalent of trying to stare at a bright light without squinting. The more T-power that's needed to create the effect, the brighter the light, the more temptation there is to have to blink. And you don't want the focus to waver, because the effect doesn't end. The T-power is funneled, and the focus is more akin to controlling and channeling. Creating an effect you don't have the focus for means the effect could work, or it could backfire. It could be weaker, or it could be uncontrollably T-powerful, causing incredible chaos. More focus will increase the effectiveness of all of your effects. T-power is crafted into effects by binding them to a location or object, which makes them similar to how we craft spells from the weave. Binding establishes a link between the T-power in the surrounding environment and the target or area. It requires a lot of focus to do, and therefore the effects aren't permanent. However, there is evidence to suggest that perpetual bindings once were possible, as lanterns and ever-burning fires have recently been found in an event known as Exanima, or Long Dead. There are 3 ways to manifest effects currently: sustained casting, immediate casting, and continuous casting. Sustained casting is our equivalent of a concentration spell, but rather than having a set total limit of time such as invisibility or a polymorph spell, the only hard limit is how long your focus can last. Immediate casting creates a one-off effect, such as we would cast a fireball or magic missile. However, it may take time to build up the T-power to create the effect desired, especially with tweaks, which we'll cover soon. Both the gathering and release of the effect require a measure of focus to be spent. Continuous casting is essentially an effect made passive and requires focus just to turn on or off. It's always there, like a spell-like ability, but one that is used only when advantageous, and could potentially be used in absentia, such as a light. Not all the Thaumaturgy powers have been discovered and catalogued yet, or more likely whatever has been written down is jealously guarded by the Thaumaturgists themselves. It's hard to divine effects that aren't being manifested at the time of the spell, but that's starting to sound like excuses, so let's move on. Effects of Thaumaturgy have been categorized into 6 spheres of influence: displacement, energy, light, body, force, and mind. Displacement is the removal, creation, or placement of space around the individual or area. One known power for displacement is the ability to create an opening to an extra-dimensional space. One thaumaturgist has written, "One of the simplest displacement's powers is Open Void. This allows you to open a pocket in space where you can store stuff safely." Based on the description, I would assume this to be a continuous effect. The space is unreachable when the effect is off, but still exists. There's still a place to put your stuff. It is the opening that is the effect, and is activated. Drawing from this idea for the sphere of effect, it's theorized that displacement could also branch into teleportation of themselves and others, and a recent discovery during the Exanima event has revealed a perpetual binding in the form of a portal, considered by all to be an example of displacement, according to ancient texts. Energy is a sphere of influence with possible uses for creating lightning, creating heating or cooling effects, and changing the nature of electromagnetism. It would be fun to say, "I am a wizard," is electromagnetism like lightning and lodestones, but it's the spectrum of incoherent light, such as the visible spectrum, infrared, ultraviolet, and even forms of radiation. What? I study other worlds. This isn't the first time I've heard of energy that isn't just lumped together as radiant. Interestingly though, they consider cold to be merely the absence of heat instead of a primal elemental force. There are no known effects for the sphere of thaumaturgy, so we're left wondering what the sphere could do with the examples of famous evokers from Toril as our only inspiration. And then there's the confusing one, because light is also written as a sphere of thaumaturgy. I can only assume, therefore, that they're talking about coherent light, which we'd call radiant. It may go off visible spectra, but it's damaging and piercing, as an example. Body is one of the 6 spheres, affecting both their own physicality and that of others. Its potential uses are the obvious healing of themselves and others, harming enemies, and affecting bodily functions. Perhaps it could mimic the processes of poisons, causing the body to believe that it has been affected by Black Lotus, or whatever their terrestrial equivalent is. Perhaps it could cause hair and nails to grow uncontrollably, blinding and inhibiting their actions. Perhaps it could waste muscles, cause vitreous humour to desiccate, maybe even sculpt the flesh itself so that arms and legs melt into the body, or the ears and mouth close permanently. One known power of body is Heart Stop, which surprisingly causes the heart of a desired target to stop. This would likely be a sustained power as the body produces chemicals and has failsafes to attempt to restart its own heart, so the power would take time to truly produce a permanent death. Force is a series of effects surrounding kinetic energy. We know of this power well thanks to the ubiquitous magic missile and the items and spells perfected by Otterlug. A few powers have been discovered from the sphere. The first is Force Blast, which creates a kinetic blast from the caster's hand. This is a great example of an immediate effect, needing focus for 1 second to build up the charge, and then focus to release the blast in a direction. This is also the perfect time to introduce tweaks. In much the same way that we've had the fireball and other people have admixtured the energy to become a cold ball or a thunderball, so too can powers be customized by taking the power and shaping the casting into a different effect. Omnidirectional Force Blast is a tweak of the original Force Blast that allows the caster to instead emit the blast as a burst, creating the same effect in all directions around the caster, albeit to a smaller overall radius. This is similar in mechanism to another world that I should really do at one point, also troubled by demons, although the similarity probably ends there. Their town of Tristram has a really nice music that was composed there though, but... Sorry, we're getting off track. Another tweak of Force Blast is instead changing the nature of energy collection from an immediate charge to a sustained energy that stays in front of the caster, from Force Blast to Force Shield, a coherent force that would interfere with and negate physical attacks. From there, the natural evolution would be to combine both the sustained tweak and the burst, to an omnidirectional shield known colloquially as the Bubble Shield, defending the caster from all directions. It could be assumed and is probable that such tweaks could cross spheres, and that such thaumaturgists capable of controlling both force and displacement could, for example, create a bubble shield that also displaces the breathable air within, creating a suffocation area from which they cannot escape. It's unknown if such tweaks, theoretical or otherwise, consume more focus, though it's a pretty good guess that using effects in maverick ways needs more concentration. Like, trying to imagine a cow is pretty easy, now imagine a cow shaped like a living wine glass. Harder, right? I sure hope so. But finally, we have the sphere that is most written about. Mind. Which makes sense, the ability to control T-power might be a congenital ability and therefore a body, but it's the mind that latches, shapes, controls, and perpetuates. Although that's an interesting thought. What if the use of body effects could grant others the thaumaturgy ability, or remove that inherent talent from others? Mind includes influencing the minds of others, causing various mental effects, direct control of others, and raising the dead. You might be thinking, what? At the last one, but the soul and mind are energies influenced by the sphere, and what is the body really but a really complicated machine built to nourish and house the mind? As long as you can return the soul to the material world, creating said material is relatively easy, especially if all you've been bringing back is a skeleton or even just a spectral form that can phase through material and possess the bodies over others. Raising the dead would likely be an immediate power. Spectral form would be continuous. Influencing the mind is the equivalent of our charm person or heroism or charm emotions, the effects covering the changing of loyalty, trust, calm, and one effect will also enrage others, causing them to attack regardless of provocation or who it is that they're closest to. They can also raise suspicion in others, leaving them more susceptible to believing your lies, and can mask your mind from others' detection or insight. These could be any of the 3 types of casting. Mental affectation includes causing confusion or fear or temporary insanity in others, exactly like the confusion spell or fear spell or insanity spell. A direct control of others includes commanding the dead to fight for you or possessing a creature or person that can also manifest as severing the control an undead has over its own body. Finally, the 6 spheres of thaumaturgy can be manipulated with learned skills known as insight and concentration. Investing time and concentration seems to lower the focus cost of continuous powers and allow more of them to be used simultaneously. Necromancers like to focus on this skill, as each reanimated corpse requires focus. Concentration is broken down into several progressive discoveries. Discoveries alter how focus is spent, including conditionings that let sustained and continuous bindings require less focus, and allow for multiple bindings to be done at once while doing another task. So imagine 3 cow wine glasses while also talking to someone that you don't really like but don't want them to know that. One thing we didn't really touch on is that the mind can run out of focus and bindings can end, but that with rest, the mind will regain focus like a resource. Discoveries in concentration will let you recover focus more quickly. Finally, mental conditioning will let you discover techniques that make you less susceptible to the mind sphere influences of others. If concentration is a skill needed to improve focus for the casting of effects, then insight is a skill needed to better shape or actually cast the effects, including the gathering of energy for immediate spells, making them cheaper to cast. There are 8 discoveries so far with insight. Expansion allows for single target effects to instead affect more than one target at the same time. Inversion allows for the discovery of the opposition effects to what you've learned. So if you're trained in enraging others, now you can also calm them. If you know Fireball, I guess you learn Cold Ball? Convergence takes effects that target a generalized area and will cause them to focus on a specific target, so causing an enemy to doubt their leader instead of all their allies. Union allows you to combine certain powers to create new powers, such as combining confusion and suspicion to instead promote fear. Coherence allows you to manipulate an effect into a more coherent form, so instead of creating light, you can create a sustained radiant beam. Iteration allows you to become more efficient at doing the same thing over and over, so that repeated casts cost less focus each time. Amalgamation is the discovery needed to be able to combine effects over several spheres, such as the suffocation bubble idea I mentioned previously. Revelation brings the caster in tune with inspiration, which I think needs more explaining. Ultimately, T-power is the same as the weave, and places of power exist within Sui Genesis that accumulate this energy. Revelation syncs the mind of the caster with these locations and with the meaning written between the lines of certain powerful tomes, allowing for the learning of new effects from the world itself. Kind of how wizards perfected the spell Gate by observing the portals that occur naturally in Toril. Revelation might be considered the nice way to become more powerful, a sort of sightseeing with a point. Because there's only one other way recorded so far to improve your abilities, and it's not practice. Thaumaturgy casting is done with a mind that cannot get objectively better, rather made easier and more efficient through discoveries in concentration and insight. But no, a thaumaturgist gains greater power through absorbing part of the transcended minds of others as they die. Any sentient mind is considered to be at least partially transcended, though obviously those of thaumaturgists and demonic entities will be more so. The capacity for T-power that can be collected at once is increased, and focus may also increase as a resource. The moments of absorbing the transcended mind may also inspire knowledge of new effects, in order to protect the human inhabitants of the world against unknown extant threats. These thaumaturgists would have had to scale to new heights of power, especially if the paranoia of the unknown grew over time. What if, in desperation, a thaumaturgist gained a power boost when another inhabitant died near them? What if they reasoned that the death of a few, in order to save the whole, was part of the greater good? But power corrupts eventually, and now the defenders of Sui Genesis may well be its doom. Coming up next time, we'll be continuing the Divinity Lectures, talking about each of the gods in previous ages, their domains of power, and the unique spell they granted their followers, and what each one might look like today. It's going to be a long lecture, but I hope you'll be right there along with me. Until then, to be continued.